Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm very pleased to be joined once again by the author Carlyn Montes de Oca, and we're going to talk about her new book, Junkyard Girl. Carlyn, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here again.
Now, Carlyn, you're a multi award winning author, of course, of my favorite, Dog is My Doctor, Cat is My Nurse, and also a former editor on movies like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids and Three Men's excuse me, and Three Men and a Little Lady. You also hold a bachelor's degree in communications and a master's degree in traditional Chinese medicine. We know you as the author who taught us how to be healed by our own pets, but this is a much more personal project and it's a memoir about your life, and you've led a remarkable life. And I think so much of it centers around your adoption. And I know we spoke on the last show about you then adopting so many pets and how that kind of was such a part of who you are. But you really examine it much more in this new book, Junkyard Girl, that is about to be widely available. So, Carlyn, I guess just start us off as you as a child and take us to some of those really vivid and compelling scenes that we read in the memoir.
Well, as a child, I will say that the thing is, this memoir is really about me discovering 3 years ago, just after I took a DNA test for fun and just to see how much Jewish blood there was in my maternal bloodline. And instead, I discovered I was adopted. And it was such a shocker. So I grew up in Southern California, never knowing this. And as a lot of other people who have discovered late in life they were adopted, I did feel different. I always describe myself as a munchkin in the land of giants. Everybody was so much taller than me. I'm 5'3". My siblings are 6'4", 6'3". Everybody's very tall. They much lighter skin. My dad had green eyes. I have dark skin, brown eyes. It was a interesting thing, but never ever knowing that until 3 years ago and taking that DNA test. So I've been really fortunate. When you describe my life as remarkable, I kind of think it is because I feel like I've had a good life. I feel like I've had three amazing careers. The first one was in the film business, as you described, and that was for 20 years I did that, and then I got a bit burned out, and then I moved on and got my master's degree in Chinese medicine and became an acupuncturist for many years. And that's where actually in that profession is when I discovered this animal human health connection that we have and how we can become healthier and happier through our relationships with our animal friends. And then when I thought, oh, okay, well, this is my life, suddenly I get boom hit with this DNA discovery that not in my wildest dreams would I have ever imagined that happening. So that leads me to here and writing a book. And for me as a writer, the way I process life and make sense of life is to put those words down on paper. So that's why I wrote a book, and here we are today.
Now, Carlyn, you find out you're 3% Jewish, and I don't know if you are a fan of Curb Your Enthusiasm or if you ever watched that Larry David show on HBO, but in the show where he finds out he's adopted and thinks for the time being that he is not Jewish, it's like the weight of the world comes off his shoulders and it's quite a relief. But for you, it wasn't that. It was kind of the opposite, where your identity was pulled away from you in a way. Can you describe that feeling and what we can expect in the book?
Sure. I mean, for me, it wasn't like I was raised Jewish. I'm Mexican American. And, when you look at the DNA breakup, it's like 52% of that. And then there's, Spanish and Portuguese, and then this really small percentage of Jewish blood. But growing up, I always remember my mother talking about the Jews, and I always thought, wow, they're the chosen people. That's so cool. And I wanted to be one of the chosen people. So it's not that part of it that was so just shocking, and it was like a I always describe it as like a wrecking ball that hit my identity and just splattered it into a million pieces. It was more that I grew up just really believing my parents were my blood parents. There was no doubt about it. I have siblings who I'm very connected with. I have a very strong family unit. I have 63 first cousins. I have a massive family. And by the way, most of the 63 first cousins all knew I was adopted, but never told me. So there was quite a wide net of this going on, but I'm just saying that that was the part. I was talking to somebody today and describing that identity is kind of your foundation. It's like your parents are your foundation, your siblings are your foundation, and everything else that you do after that is built on that. So when that part of it is pulled out from under you, everything sort of falls away. And for me, it was, I think I always think of myself as kind of a strong person, and a resilient person. But boy, I I mean, it's a shock. It's like it felt like this chaos. I was crying all the time, and I'm not somebody who cries a lot. I'd be tying my shoes, and my husband would be like, "Why are you crying so much?" I'm like, "I don't even know." And it's really because I felt a profound sense of a loss and sadness. It was like a severing between myself and my family, just to know this. And I would never have thought that would have been the case, but that's what I felt just internally, just a massive sense of loss.
And I'm glad you brought up your sisters. I thought it was nice, the imagery of the electric tea kettle about to boil, and this sister who it's not that easy for her to just spill the tea. You really have to drag it out, not just drag it out of her, but you have to wait until she's ready to tell you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the scene that you're describing is that, well, actually, for the listeners, you want me to just tell a little bit right before that? Basically what happened was I was sitting there minding my own business at my computer one day when this message popped up on Facebook from somebody who had friended me about a week before. And he said to me, "You look an awful lot like my wife." And I was like, God, what a flirt. And I just ignored him. And he kept messaging me. And then he sent me a picture of his wife. And he said, "Don't you think you look like her?" And I said, "Yeah, I think your wife and I shop for glasses at the same store. I don't see a resemblance." And he's like, "Well, ancestry DNA says differently." And I was like, "What?" I had taken the ancestry test. Nobody knew that outside my family. And he said, and then he basically, then he said his wife's name. And I thought, oh my God, I remember I was so busy that I didn't pay a lot of attention to the test, only to see that I was only 3% Jewish. But there was this woman's name there. And it said, if I had read it closely, I would have realized it said this could potentially be a half sibling. And I didn't read that. So that's who that person was. And so she said, she wrote me and she was very nice and was like trying not to be like, too pushy in any way. She was very nice. And she said, "I'm looking for family. You and I came up very strongly. Maybe you know something." And I said, "No, I don't know anything, but I'll ask my siblings. Maybe they'll know." And that's when I talked to them and told them, and they all said, "No, I don't know anything." But then 2 weeks later, my sister arrived at my house in Santa Fe. And it was one of those Santa Fe winters where the snow is moving horizontally. It's so cold and it's so crazy. And she shows up and she's in the house maybe 5 minutes and, putting on the tea. And we're all watching it boil because she has just told me something big has happened in our family. And I'm like, "What happened? What happened?" But I didn't want to push her. So finally she sat down and she started crying and pulled out the pages from that she had written on the plane. And that's when she described that the big secret that had happened in our family, the big event, was that I was adopted. And that's how it began.
And I think it's a wonderful jumping off point as well as a wonderful focus for people who are adopted, who I know often feel disconnected or have a darkness within them. And so they can really connect with this book. And I think people who aren't adopted can learn to be more compassionate. They can look at your example with all the pets that you've adopted and the way that you've really, we really get into the deep of it. And we hear a lot about your mother. Um, please tell us about your mother.
My adoptive mother, yes. It's an interesting thing because until I really wrote this book, I don't think I knew my mother as well as I do now. But my mother, I mean, I grew up really loving my mother. I mean, she was strong, she was powerful. Both my parents were immigrants from Mexico, and they endured a lot in their life. But my mother in particular was really tough. I mean, she was tough, and some people have even said to me, wow, some advanced readers have said, I kind of wanted to slap your mother from time to time. And I guess that's also how I felt when I was growing up. I mean, she and I were at odds a lot. And I could know, and part of that maybe is a little bit of the immigrant and first generation, child kind of back and forth that goes on. But we were at odds culturally. I mean, she was very proud of her Mexican heritage. I just wanted to be American, like all the kids, on everything you saw on TV. And so we were at odds a lot, and I mean, it got to a point where I really tried to keep her away and keep her out, never realizing all this time that she had done something so extraordinary for me that when I learned about my adoption, I realized to the extent of what she had done. And what she did was when my sister up to my house and started reading to me from those pages that she had written, she told me that my mother had gone to visit a friend of hers. And this is when we lived in Carpinteria, California at the time. And that's where I grew up. She went to visit a friend, and when she was knocking on the door, she heard a woman crying in the backyard. And when her friend came to the door, she said, hey, who's this woman here? Do you know her? And she said, oh, yeah, that's my cousin. And she's here from Chicago, and she's not married. She has 2 kids. She's got a third one on the way, and she wants me to help her get an abortion. And this was the 60s when abortion was illegal everywhere. And the woman said to my mother, I'm not going to help her. So my mother went home, talked to my dad. 24 hours later, came back and said to this complete stranger, we'll adopt your child, and we'll raise her. And they took the whole family, her and her 2 kids and me in the womb, to live with them for 6 months, and then gave them money to go back to Chicago. My parents were not wealthy people by any stretch of the imagination. They already had 3 children. And my mother, then I learned, took the kids, my sister and my 2 brothers, and around the crib and said, this is your new sister. She's adopted. You're never to tell her she's adopted because people will try to hurt her. There would be a stigma around children out of wedlock at that time. And they came from Mexico, where there was an even bigger stigma around children out of wedlock. And they said, you'll always protect her, you'll watch out for her, but you'll never tell her. So when I learned all of that, I was in such shock. But the first thing I felt was a massive amount of gratitude because, wow, I almost not only would have maybe not even been on this planet because, she would have, and that's a thing, I believe every woman should have the right to do whatever she wants with her body. But it's a weird thing to look back on your life when you're my age and go, whoa, I almost didn't have this whole life. So that was my mother. She was a complex character, but in the end, God, am I grateful.
Well, and that kind of compassion, I think, you've relived many times through your adoption of your pets. And I think you've been lucky in love as well. So, how does that relate to who you are as a companion, both to your animals and humans?
Wow, Jacques, you're asking me the tough questions now. Well, I've wondered about that because I've always adopted. I never ever have thought not to adopt animals. I mean, that's to me, it's like go for the underdog, go for the animal that needs the most help. And to be honest, I've done that. I did that with the animals that I had that I wrote about in my first book. And they were hard dogs. I mean, they all had issues that I had to work with to help them, but in the end, they helped me. I mean, I wrote a book, I learned more about myself, I understood more deeply about this animal human bond. And I often remember growing up and saying out loud, well, if I ever have kids, I'm going to adopt them. And I don't know where that came from because nobody had told me I was adopted. We never talked much about adoption. And so I have had to look back, especially in writing this book, and think to myself, how much, I mean, my mother was a tough person, but I saw her being compassionate in so many ways. So it had to rub off. I mean, my parents definitely rubbed off on me in terms of, nature nurture, because I didn't know. And I did meet my biological mother probably 3 weeks after this. And there was nothing I could relate to with her in whatsoever. So I see that a lot of the qualities I have now came from my adoptive family.
What about the half sister? Did you stay in touch with your biological half sister?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It wasn't quite a roller coaster of events, just because I had to, here was this woman who had reached out to me and said, "Do you know anybody I might be related to?" Because she said, "I don't have any family to speak of." She had been estranged from her birth mother, and later I came to realize my birth mother, for 20 years, and her brother also. So she was looking for family. And so I felt really bad for her. And I thought, gosh, now I know I'm her half sister. So I did call her a week later. I needed a week to just get at least a little bit solidified with this idea. And it happened to be Valentine's Day. So I called her and told her, and she was beyond happy and excited that she kept saying, "I have a sister, I have a sister." And the thing was, it was odd about that was I was coming from a completely different place. Like I just didn't even know I had anybody else. So she was like, "I have a sister, I have a sister." And I'm like, it's all so much, it's all too much. But then 3 weeks, and then I had asked her, "Do you know about what about our birth mother? Where is she?" And she said, "Oh, I'm sure she's dead. She couldn't, my birth mother was bipolar. And so she was mentally ill and, just wasn't a good life for my half sister, and I really felt for her. But lo and behold, we find out 3 weeks later that she is in a state hospital in Chicago on hospice. So 3 weeks later, after finding out all of this, we all go to see her, and that's where I met my half sister for the first time and my birth mother 3 weeks later.
And so when you meet the half sister, are you looking at her going, okay, she kind of got the smile, she kind of looks like me. What was that like? Are you looking at her going, yeah, yeah, I think she is my sister, or is that going on?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you know this, but I think women assess each other very quickly. I don't know that men go through that process, but I've talked to my girlfriends about this. We all know, we all assume you make these quick judgments very quickly, and you're like, yeah, yeah, I know who that woman is. So,
You
um,
you could put on. I'm like Lois Lane. If you put on red lipstick, I would think it's a different person.
so yeah, I in fact that was one of those moments it slows down, like in a movie it slows down, because I sat there and I purposely got to the restaurant where I was supposed to meet her early so I could just be settled in my space, drinking tea, calm, not in a hurry. And when she walked in, she had those glasses on. We shop at the same store, and she had longish straight hair. I have straight hair. Nobody that I grew up with in my family had straight hair. And I looked at her, and I don't know, I don't know if I did not see a resemblance or I did not want to see a resemblance, because it was too soon. Everything was too soon. So, but I did look at her clothing and I thought, oh, that's what I'm wearing tomorrow. Isn't that funny? That same thing. And so, yeah, for an hour and a half, I think we were together. I mean, and I'm sure she was doing the same thing. We were both looking at each other a lot.
Okay, we're about to go to a break, but do you think you guys, before you met, ever communicated through your dreams?
And, I have a very vivid dream life. But I think in my dream life, I always imagined I had a twin brother somewhere. That was my thing. And I did obviously have a brother, but he had passed away, a different brother. But no, no, not in that way, which is surprising to me. November 2nd to November 9th is my launch date. It's going to be on Amazon during that time. The following week, it will be available widely.
Carlene, I know you were also voted sexiest vegetarian over 50, and uh, that's not in the new bio, but we talked before and you told me it's still something you're proud of. Uh, and I think that's just one of the ways you're changing the world. What about the universality of your story in this memoir? How are you connecting to people on a broad widely? How are you connecting to a broad range of people?
Well, first, I want to say that was PETA's sexiest vegetarian over 50, which was PETA's People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. So that was a few years ago, and I am proud of it because it allowed me to really put out there my feeling about animals, all animals, regardless of whether they're companion animals or not. I'm a vegan, and I'm very proud of that. So that's my connection to the sexiest vegetarian over 50. In terms of universality of my book, that is something I have been really surprised about because I had a really large group of advanced readers taking a peek at my book first to see what they thought. And one of the things that has surprised me is how many people have reached out. And these are not people who were raised as Mexican Americans in Southern California, going through this bicultural kind of, I don't know, existential thing that I was going through as I was growing up. But they're coming from completely different walks of life. And they say to me, I understand your story. I relate to your story. This scene that you wrote, that reminded me of how I was growing up. And I'm so surprised because I grew up never wanting to tell my story. I kind of describe myself as a chameleon. I'd always be trying to morph into something else so people wouldn't know the true me. I did not want people to know. We did talk about this a little bit, but the title Junkyard Girl, the reason it's called that is my parents were hoarders. And so there was a lot of stuff everywhere, outside, inside. And I was ashamed of that. And I was ashamed of being Mexican because I wanted to be more, like the Partridge Family. I want, which is maybe I'm dating myself, but so there was a lot of shame growing up, and I was always angry at my mother and never wanted people to know. And yet now I am finding that the more I express who I am truthfully and authentically and just let people know, they are coming back at me with their own stories and they're not judging me. If anything, they're embracing the story and embracing me and finding commonality. And that is an incredible feeling of connection.
In the US, almost 7 million people are adopted. Are you also connecting with people who were adopted, or are they saying to you, this is my story?
Yeah, I didn't for 2 years. I was busy trying to figure out my own story the first year. The second year, I started writing it down and feeling kind of alone now that I think about it, feeling kind of like I was the only one going through this. And then I started reaching out to other communities of, I'm what they call a late discovery adoptee, LDA. So I started reaching out to other LDA communities and other adoption communities because there's kind of all sorts of there's an umbrella of adoption, and there's all sorts of other like subcategories. And I started seeing that we all have unique stories, whether we're adopted and found out at the beginning of our life or found out late like me, or maybe discovered on Ancestry or 23andMe that we have a brother or a sister or a parent or a cousin or somebody who we did not know as part of our family. And we all react differently. That's the one thing I've seen. Uh, for example, I think that I've come through it and I feel pretty good. There are a lot of people who are stuck, who emotionally are really stuck. And I really feel for them because I remember what it felt like to be told and how I was did not have a place to stand. I felt like I was just all over the place, and that chaos is pretty traumatic. So so yes, I'm involved in different communities, and I'm grateful to hear people's stories, because I think the more we tell our stories, the healthier we can be. I think part of it is, for me, was keeping it under wraps and not talking, but now I feel very free and very, very, just more empowered from telling my story. So I think storytelling is a marvelous way to help move through trauma.
Yeah, God, that is so good right there, and so touching to me. I let you off the hook a little bit earlier with the question about whether you were lucky in love, but I think it maybe really ties to what you're saying. How much of your identity were you then able to find with your latest partner, and how much of how rewarding is that, since you're, I guess, like you said, free, like in the Janis Joplin sense?
Well, I would say that I was unlucky in love for a very long time, and then I struck gold. And that is that, uh, in fact, I did a TEDx talk, and if anybody's interested, they can go, because I talk a little bit more about it in the TEDx talk. But gosh, my husband, who I've been with for the last 22 years, is extraordinary. I mean, I really feel like I won the cosmic lottery, when I had been like totally before that, just not lucky in any way, and not understanding why I was so unlucky, where I was not, I was just very unhappy. And then I met Ken, and he has been, I don't know that I had never really thought about my identity with him, or how that is, but what I do find is his completely unwavering support about any way that I am. However, I've never had anybody not tell me to be a particular way. He has not once in 22 years said, you should wear your hair this way, or you should wear different clothes, or you should be whatever. He just completely, he's almost like dogs, totally like accept you as you are. He accepts me as I am, and he's very supportive, and he's comes from the film business as well. We have a similar background, so he's very creative. He has great ideas. So now I feel like I won the cosmic lottery. So that's where I am with love.
And so, what was his reaction when it's a memoir? You have a pretty wide, I wouldn't say wide lane, but you are pretty set in your lane with the kind of work you do, writing about people and their pets. But this one, you're, going to put yourself out there, and it's really about Carlene. I imagine he was supportive as usual, but was he worried that it could go a certain way, or go wrong or
Well,
right?
yeah, I mean, I always give Ken the earliest draft to read. I always give him he's the first one to read it. So also, Ken is not the kind of person who says, "Oh, this is really good," and doesn't mean it. In fact, he goes he's never critical, but he just isn't as effusive. So I kind of judge, like, is he smiling? What is he saying? And I could tell early on that, I mean, from what he said and what he didn't say, that it was pretty good. So, and he never, I feel very lucky, because this is the kind of human who doesn't tell me you should write this or you should do this. He never has said that once about anything I should do or be or say, which is wonderful, because it allows me to just be who I am. And hopefully I'm the same kind of partner. So we're not telling each other what to do. We're just allowing each other to be. So
So
again,
in the early drafts, is he reading any of it, going, "Hey, I didn't know this about you," or "Hey, you never mentioned this"?
I don't think so. I think he found the whole thing I mean, there's a lot of it that's humorous. I mean, I think that people have said, God, I've been laughing out loud reading at some of these stories that you had growing up. And I think he was, if I don't think there is any time he said that he didn't know. What he did really love is that there is a chapter about he and I and how we got together. And it's pretty moving because it coincides with something that happened with my mother, my adoptive mother. And he just said that this is beautiful, and I think he thanked me for it.
That is the right reaction to have. I think somebody like me would maybe say, "That's not the way I remember it."
Well, that's the thing about memoir. We all remember things differently. If any of my siblings were to have written this book, they would have written it completely differently.
Carlene, I'm reading my Santa Fe Reporter, and they say her craft shines in her descriptions of family, astute, glowing renderings of their complex relationships bring to life the conflict she felt when she learned they weren't related to her by blood. She illustrates her mother particularly vividly, the details of her beautician's uniform, her tense, commanding patterns of speech, yet those parts were the most difficult to write, Montes de Oca says. I really love the picture they used of you. And tell me, was that nice was it Alex who interviewed you there?
Actually, it was Annabella Farmer.
Oh, so was it nice talking to Annabella? Was she,
Yes. I remember getting off the phone and thinking, she asked me such thoughtful questions. And now reading the article, I saw, gosh, she took those answers and made it beautiful. I mean, if you read it, I think it's just beautifully written.
oh yeah. And she gets into, you talk about the expansiveness of being able to choose your family. Is there anything we should say about that?
Well, it's something unexpected. It's one of the gifts from discovering this whole thing, because most people think, God, what a shock. This is kind of, gosh, how do you feel? Because it's so traumatic. But there are gifts from, I think, any challenging experience any of us face in our life. And one of them was, I think I described how it felt like a severing between myself and my adoptive family when I first learned this. And that's why I felt kind of untethered, and I didn't know where I was anymore, where I belonged. It felt that way. But after that settled, after some months and time passed, I realized there was also a freedom in that. I felt liberated. I felt like, okay, this allows me to choose who my family is. Who is it? Is it blood family? Is it family, that the family who raised me? Who is it? And I realized suddenly that it was all of that. It was my adoptive family in particular, because we shared so much. Yeah, I think that my parents made a mistake by not telling me I was adopted early on. My siblings should have told me. I believe that to be true. But people make mistakes all the time, and we still love them. So that is my family. I have this new half sister that's included in that family. I have amazing friends who, I mean, the love and the connection there. So that is part of my family. And of course, all of the animals that I share my life with I consider part of my family. And there is no distinction, doesn't mean that this family's made of various genders and identities and whatnot, and it's an amazing family. So this is one of my big takeaways about chosen family.
Well, and I think we talked a bit about Joseph Campbell on our last show. Is that right? Do you
It
write about
sounds
him in your last
familiar.
book?
Yes, I did. I had a whole chapter about animals accompanying us on the hero's journey.
Yeah, and I think that is very much another part of Joseph Campbell's journey is that the hero doesn't know that they don't know that they were adopted, and Luke Skywalker finds out later that his dad is actually Darth. I guess that's in the second part, but he finds out later that he's actually an adopted son of his real father is Anakin Skywalker, I guess, or in so many more. Now, was that part of this, or does that inform your writing in this memoir at all?
What part? What exactly?
The hero, you being the
Oh,
hero, not knowing your parents, or believing at first that your parents are living on, is it Alderaan, and then you find out later that your dad is the Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker.
well, my biggest hope, because I do not know who my birth father is, but my biggest hope is that it's not Darth Vader. but it's possible. So, I'm all about the hero's journey. I use that structure often when I write fiction. And I also believe that to be true. If we look at our life as I call it the heroine's journey now. But if we look at our life in this way that, we're all called at some point and probably many times in our life to accept the challenge of the hero's journey. And the hero's journey means, remember how I described how I was just sitting minding my own business at my computer, and suddenly my life changed like that. And that's how the heroes in our movies and Star Wars and so many other films that we see that we love, Frodo and the Lord of the Rings, something called him to action. And it was either you go on this path and you go and find out the truth. And
So the book launch is November 2nd through 9th, and we'll be able to get it widely after that. Carlene, it's been such a fun show, and thank you so much for coming on. Before we go, though, I want to read a little bit of the praise of the book, and starting with some of your movie friends. This is from Jay Rabinowitz. He's the editor from What Requiem for a Dream and many more. Junkyard Girl is an astonishing tale told by a gifted storyteller. Brilliantly written, emotionally engaging, and unrestrained in its intimacy. It is an honest account of a life unraveling. But as it's doing so, we do indeed begin to feel the divine hand at play. The book is evidence, as heartbreaking as it is heartfelt. In the end, it's a celebration of the deepest mysteries of life, asking who we really are and where we really come from. A delightful read. And this is from Gary W. Goldstein, producer of Pretty Woman and Under Siege. With brazen vulnerability, warmth, humor, and emotional courage, Carlyn Montes de Oca takes us on a journey rife with laughter, tears, her junkyard childhood with a surprising secret enormous enough to eclipse everything she knew about herself as a fully formed adult. Carlene's prose and descriptions are like music that seduces and lights up our senses. She pours us into an irresistible and unimaginable tale that makes Junkyard Girl a most unexpected delight. And this is from Maria Jacques, the Emmy Award winning television writer and producer. She says Junkyard Girl is utterly engaging from start to finish, an astonishing story of a secret adoption and a beautifully rendering tale of complicated family dynamics, the secrets we keep and the gifts we give to each other. Carlene, I am just loving those. I love the memoir, and thank you so much for coming on. It seems so nice to be able to get some of your friends from your former life as a film editor to read your book and comment on it and say such nice, glowing things. Is there anything you want to add before we go?
well, I'd love to invite people. I'm having an event on November 5th and November 12th, and you can just come to my website to find out more details. And my website is animalhumanhealth.com, or you can Google me, Carlyn Montes de Oca. But I would love it. It's going to be great, especially November 5th. I'm in a conversation with actress Barbara Kerford. And so that'll be fun. I also want to encourage people to buy the book. I'm so thrilled with all the reviews that I'm getting, but also there's going to be a giveaway between November 2nd and 9th. So if you buy your book then and let me know, you get to be part of that giveaway. And I'm really happy to be here. And thank you so much for having me on the show.
Thank you so much. Everybody, the memoir is called Junkyard Girl, and this was Carlyn Montes de Oca. We'll see you next week.